erase this, and we'll do another problem with substitution of variables to give you more practice. So let's say for this problem that I know ahead of time that x is equal to -1, y is equal to 2, and z is equal to -3. Z is equal to -3. And again, I want to have some expressions that I'm going to substitute into here. So let's go ahead and say I have something called y squared. And the teacher or the exam says, what is y squared? Well, I know what y is. Y is equal to 2. So if I substitute in 2 squared, that's 2 times 2, which is 4. So we would say y squared is 4 because I know that y is actually equal to 2, so when I substitute it in, that's what I get. Now, you can be tricked on your test a little bit if you're given something like this, negative z squared. You know, a lot of students, they won't be very careful about this, so they'll get the wrong answer. What you need to do is put your negative here. Z is given by -3, and then I square that. Very important. See, z is right here. Forget about that negative sign. Z is right here. So you're actually squaring the -3, and then there's also a negative out in front from your original problem. So when you write it properly, -3 squared, what do you think that's going to equal? Right? Well, what we're going to have here is a negative from this guy, and inside here I've got -3 times -3. That's what -3 squared is, right? So what is this inside of here? -3 times -3. 3 times 3 is 9, right? And I have the same signs here, negative times negative, so I'm going to get a positive 9. So the answer, since I've got a positive 9 inside of here, I have a negative outside, the actual answer is -9 for the whole thing. And you need to be careful to do that right. You need to make sure that when you substitute in for z, you put it inside of here and wrap it in parentheses to make sure that you square this whole thing like we did, and then apply that negative at the end to get the right answer. All right, now let's say we have something like x times y. You know, when you write two letters together with no symbol, no multiplication symbol, you basically know that they're multiplied together. So you have -1 for x. For y, you have 2. Now we're multiplying these guys together. 2 times 1 is 2. And the sign, since these guys are different, is just going to be negative. -2. Let's say you have x plus y times z. The z is sitting outside, so I do that last. And so let's go and substitute in. X is -1. Inside of here, I'm going to have -1 plus y. Y was given as 2. And then I'm multiplying on the outside by z, which is -3. Now, order of operations tells me that I have to do what's inside of this parentheses first. Now, this is not multiplication. This is addition, right? This is what we did in the last section. The signs are different. So what you do is you ignore the sign and you subtract. 2 minus 1 is 1. The sign is taken by the sign of the bigger number, which in this case is positive. So really what I have is I have 1 times -3. Now we know how to multiply these things together. 1 times 3 is 3. Okay? And since they're different signs, positive times negative, the answer is always going to be negative. So the answer I get there is -3. All right, so next, let's say we have x times y plus y times z. What's that going to equal? X is -1, y is 2, plus y is 2, z is -3, like this. X times y plus y times z. So let's do this multiplication separately from this multiplication and see what we get. 1 times 2 is going to give me 2, and since they're different signs, it takes a negative. 2 times 3 is 6, and since they're different signs, that also takes a negative. So what I really have is -2 plus, let me go ahead and do parentheses to make it clear, plus another -6. And we know how to do this from the last section. Since we're adding two things that have the same sign, two negatives, the answer will be negative. And then to get the number, we just add these guys. 6 plus 2 is 8. And if that confuses you, think about being at -2 and going left 6 more units. That's going to get you to -8. And that is the answer there. All right, now for the next problem, let's say we have y squared times z squared. All right, y squared. Y is 2, so I'm going to have 2 squared. And then z is negative 3, so I put negative 3 squared. And make sure that this negative 3 for z goes, and this entire negative 3 is squared. That's what you need to make sure that you're doing. All right, 2 squared. What does that mean? 2 times 2 is 4. All right. Over here, as I'm doing the squaring first, negative 3 squared means negative 3 times negative 3, which is going to give you positive 9, because 3 times 3 is 9. Negative times negative is going to give me positive, right? And then what I'm going to have here is 4 times 9, which is positive 36. And that's the answer. Positive times positive, of course, always is going to give you positive. All right, now let's see what we have. And we have y times x minus y, and I'm squaring this guy. Y is given by 2, so that's going to sit out in front. Inside, I've got negative 1 minus y, which is 2, and I'm squaring this guy. Now, how do I handle this? Well, from order of operations, I have to do what's inside the parentheses first. So what is negative 1 minus 2? There's a couple different ways you can think about it. Think of negative 1 on the number line. I'm going 2 units to the left, so I'm starting at negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. So really, this is negative 3 inside, but if that confuses you, just think of it as this subtracting a 2 is the same as adding a negative 2. It's the same as adding a negative 2, right? So if you have negative 1 plus a negative 2, you'll just add the numbers to get 3, and the resulting sign would be negative. We've done that many times before. So finally, what we have here is 2 parentheses, negative 3 inside, and that is squared. So at the end of the day, what do I do here? Well, here I have something squared. Negative 3 squared. What is that equal to? What is negative 3 times negative 3? Negative 3 times negative 3 should give me positive 9, because negative times negative is positive. So ultimately, I have 2 times 9 left over, which is positive 18. And that is the final answer of that problem. So again, you have to take it one step at a time. Go inside the parentheses, do this guy, then square this guy, then multiply. And if you do any of those steps wrong, you won't get the right answer, so take your time. X squared y minus z is equal to, well, x is negative 1 squared. Over here I have y, which is 2, minus z. So I have minus a negative 3, because z is negative. And that's it. Now, I need to do a few things. Let's go inside of the parentheses here and work on this. But I realize right away I'm subtracting a negative, and we talked about that in the previous section. When you see that, you add the opposite. So what I really have is 2 plus 3, which is 5. 2 plus 3, which is 5. Now also, I have this guy squared out here, negative 1 squared. So I can hit this guy right now. What's negative 1 times negative 1? It's going to always give you a positive 1. 1 times 1 is 1, and since negative times negative gives you positive, there you are. These guys are multiplied together because they're all sitting together, so you have 1 times 5, which just is simply 5. And that's the right answer. Now, one thing I want to say before we move on, see, all we've done up until this point is multiplying numbers, basically. And I've told you that the signs are given what we've done, and I've also told you that dividing numbers is basically using the same rules for the signs. So it's not going to be hard. But I want to take a little bit of break to show you that for each of these problems, I write the problem down, and then I substitute in everything exactly as it is, and then I go one step at a time, finding each little chunk of what I need to do. And I may have 4 or 5 things written down on my paper as I go through the problem to get to the answer. A lot of students starting algebra think that somehow they're doing better if they don't write very much on their paper. I talk to lots of students that when they start adding and subtracting negative numbers, they don't show anything on their paper because they think somehow that they're a better student if they can do it in their head. Let me tell you guys, that is so far from the truth. When I am doing a problem, even if it's like a 3-page math problem, I am showing every single step on my paper for 2 reasons. Number one, it helps me get my answers right because I can go and solve every little part of it and write it down, and I don't have to keep things in my head. The second reason is I'm going to make a mistake at some point. You guys are going to make a mistake at some point. Everybody makes mistakes. If you don't write it down, you won't know where you made your mistake. I mean, if I didn't write any of this down, a lot of students will try to put this stuff in their head, and they'll try to square this, and they'll try to subtract, and they'll try to multiply, and they'll write something down. But then they'll get the wrong answer eventually, and they won't know what they did wrong. Here, if I get the wrong answer, I can trace back and say, okay, I did this wrong, or I did this wrong, and then I can know what to practice, basically. So I can't say it enough. Please, when you're doing your problems, do them exactly as I'm doing them. I'm not doing this on the board with all these steps just because I'm trying to teach you. I'm doing it this way because this is how I do it. This is how I do it when I do my own problems. So showing steps on a math test is so much better, and it means you're basically doing so much better for yourself than trying to do it in your head. I can't stress it enough. So make sure